Chery must really not like Proton, because first they went after the X50 with their Amoda 5, and then they went after the X90 with the Tiggo 8 Pro. And now they're back for more, targeting the X70 with this, the Tiggo 7 Pro, which not only has one more cylinder and 100 more cc under the bonnet, it also manages to undercut it at an introductory price of just 119,800 ringgit, making it more affordable than the most expensive PROTON X70 while matching it in terms of specification. However, as we all know, on-paper specifications only tell half the story. The bigger question is, can the Tiggo 7 Pro hold up against scrutiny out on the open road? Well, we've spent the last week with this, and now we're ready to tell you if it can. My name is Aiman Abdullah. This is Malaysian Motoring. This is our review of the Chery Tiggo 7 Pro. Now, the Tiggo 7 Pro is available in Malaysia in one sole variant, which means there is no variant name, it's just the Tiggo 7 Pro. Now, up front, you will find a 1.6-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol engine producing 194 horsepower and 290 Newton meters of torque, with power going to the front wheels via a 7-speed dual-clutch automatic gearbox. 0 to 100 times? Irrelevant. The most important part is, fuel economy in this car is not bad, but we'll touch on that a little bit later. Now, the thing about the Tiggo 7 Pro is there have been some updates to this car in its home market of China, but we're getting this version, which is not bad, but it's also not the very latest that we could get, so it's a bit of a hit and miss. So up front, you get full LED headlights, replete with a scrolling indicator down here, but the daytime running lights and positioning lights are there. Now, I have not seen separated DRLs for quite some time now, and it does make this car look a lot older than it actually is. Now, between those headlights, you will find the massive Chery grille, replete with these sort of little diamond effect pattern thing here. And its hexagonal shape is very similar to what we've seen from the Tiggo 8 Pro and distances itself from the Amoda 5. Now, it is worth bearing in mind that this car's full retail price of about 124,000 ringgit means that it is about 10,000 ringgit more than the Amoda 5, while also being more practical, obviously being one segment larger. As a result, it does mean that this exterior design is meant to be a bit more elegant, which is why you have these blue streaks down here, again that Tiggo style front grille, and an overall slightly more traditional shape compared to the bolder and more assertive Amoda 5. Now, down the side, the Tiggo 7 Pro is not particularly noteworthy for any particular reason because it just looks like an SUV. Rolling stock is handled by a set of 18-inch alloy wheels wrapped in Atlas A51 SUV tires, which are interesting. And you get a lot of chrome work down the side. So you have a little bit of silver down there to sort of break up the visual monotony of the side profile. You get some chrome around the windows, and you have a set of roof rails, which I suspect are non-functional. Now, the reason why the car is doing its little dance is because there is a proximity key. So as you walk up to the car, it unlocks. As you walk away, it will lock. There is also a proximity key for the boot. So if you stand by the boot long enough, the boot will pop open. Now, I'd like to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about dimensions. Now, the Tiggo 7 Pro is very similar in size to the PROTON X70. It's just a little bit lower, but it is also wider and longer. And more importantly, the wheelbase is also a little bit longer from what you get from the X70. It's also significantly longer than what you get from the Amoda 5. Now, I bring that up because it does pay dividends inside, which we will get to shortly. But overall, the side profile of this car is kind of uninteresting. Now, at least the back end of the Tiggo 7 Pro is a little bit more interesting because you still get some of those blue highlights up here, which I think is an interesting touch. And they stay blue no matter which color you go for, mind you. Now, at least the rear end does benefit from this light bar, which certainly makes it look very distinctive at night. But the tail lights themselves are actually bulb. So the brake lights and the indicators and the reverse lights, etc., are all done up in halogen bulbs, which is an interesting choice given the fact this is a new car. Now, the back end of the Tiggo 7 Pro, to me, is not really its best look because while the light bar is nice, the fact that the number plate is mounted down here rather than up here means that there's a lot of metal work here, which kind of makes it look a little bit unfinished. Now, mercifully, when you open this tailgate, which is powered as standard, you will find a pretty good amount of space. There is a parcel shelf, which we've moved, but in terms of overall volume, this is very similar to what you get from the PROTON X70. You should be able to fit 1, 2, 3 three large size bags in here, or many cabin size suitcases. And of course, you can fold the rear seats down 60-40 if you need even more space, which will free up about 1,000 odd liters worth of room. You also get a couple of hooks to hang up some stuff. There's a power outlet here, and underneath the boot floor you will find a full-size spare wheel, which means that if you intend to take this car touring, out on a long drive, on an adventure, balik kampung perhaps, if heaven forbid the worst happens to you, you at least have a spare tire for you to use, unlike in a Toyota Vios. Now, the interior of the Tiggo 7 Pro is very similar to what we saw from the Tiggo 8 Pro, and therefore also by extension the Omoda E5. And that's because you get these twin 12.3-inch screens up ahead of you, with the center one obviously doing your infotainment stuff and the one on the right doing your heads-up display and driver's instrumentation. Now, this center display is very snappy and quite responsive, although I will admit that it does take a little bit of time to boot up. But at least once it does, you have wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which means that at least you don't have to deal with this interface too much. And of course, you don't have to deal with its built-in navigation because you have Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. Additionally, the wires, in order to connect to Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, should you want it to be wired, live up here. So at least it's not a faff to try and reach somewhere down there or in here, which I hugely appreciate. But of course, if you are using it wirelessly, there's also a 50-watt wireless charger up front, which means that if you have a phone that can achieve such speeds, you should be able to charge it quite meaningfully up here. Now, aside from that, the plus point with a lot of Chery vehicles is the interior quality, both in terms of fit and finish as well as material quality. So in terms of material quality, everything in here is as you'd expect from a Tiggo model, which means that you have soft touch materials here on the door, replete with some stitching. You get more soft touch materials down here and in here. In fact, everything that you can feel sort of at hip height, everything here is soft touch, even up here, and even the dash top all the way to the little bit of plastic that sits between the dash top and the bottom of the windscreen, which is certainly very good attention to detail. Now, because this is broadly the same interior as the Tiggo 8 Pro, it means that you have a row of touch buttons here to control the majority of your air conditioning and defogging functions. You have your electronic gear selector here, as well as your mode selector down here, as well as various little shortcut buttons for things like your 360-degree camera, your navigation system, vehicle settings, as well as your volume and your electronic parking brake. Underneath here, you will find a relatively large glove box, which is quite deep, as you can see, and it actually feeds off of the air conditioning that goes to the rear, which means that any items that you store in here can stay quite cool. Now, in addition to the twin cup holders you get up here, which are large enough for even a large size bottle like this, you also have space underneath the center console where you'll find a 12-volt socket, which allow you to charge up even more devices should you need it. There's also a decently sized glove box here, and overall, the interior is appointed relatively well. Now, in terms of the seats, both of these front seats are powered with memory settings for the driver as well as ventilation for the two front seats. Now, this is obviously an upgrade from a lot of other cars. For example, the PROTON X70 only has ventilation here on the bottom part, whereas for the Chery, you also get ventilation on the back. However, you do not get an adjustable headrest, but mercifully these seats are sculpted well enough that your head will naturally rest on the headrest. I'm 170 centimeters-ish for reference, which means this is a pretty good place to be. On top of that, this seat offers a decent amount of adjustment, both in terms of height as well as your movement back and forth. However, there is no angle adjustment, just like the X70. There is no lumbar adjustment, which the X70 has, but you do have a good amount of adjustment in the steering wheel, which means it's very easy for you to get comfortable. Now, in addition to this, because the Tiggo 7 Pro is available as one sole model, it also means that it is absolutely kitted to the hilt. So we get an 8-speaker Sony audio system, as well as a panoramic sunroof, which puts it on par with the X70 flagship X, which is the topmost model of the X70 lineup. And overall, everything in here does feel rather nice. If I had to nitpick, I will say that these indicator stalks do not feel as high quality as I would necessarily like. It's not the action or the movement of them, it's just the build quality of the stalks themselves. Just not so nice. And it is in jarring contrast with the rest of the buttons in here, because everything in here feels nice and clicky, almost Audi-like in their movement and operation, and so it's just a shame that this was overlooked. Now in the back of the Tiggo 7 Pro, there are some pros and cons. That is not a pun. Because up here, you no longer get the soft touch material, it's all hard, scratchy plastic, but at least down here, this is all nice and soft, just as you expect from the front. You also get the same speaker grills for the Sony audio system, which even come with a lit ring around them, which function not only as lights for the ambient lighting system, but they also act as a door opening warning. Should the vehicle detect an oncoming vehicle from this side and you try to open the door, it will flash in red or orange or a warning type color. Now with the front seat set up in my driving position, again about 170-ish centimeters or the national average, I do have a good amount of knee room and a good amount of headroom despite that panoramic sunroof. I also get a set of crotch coolers here, a single USB-A port, as well as a deployable center armrest with a couple of cup holders. It is worth noting that these rear seats do not have an adjustable recline angle, so this is essentially what you get. You also don't get side blinds on this car, which would have been very useful for families with children, because you do get ISOFIX mounts in this car which are hidden via these little rubber tethers, so you aren't going to lose the covers over time. Now, it is worth noting that the Tiggo 7 Pro in Malaysia is front-wheel drive. As a result, there is no need for a transmission tunnel, so this floor is surprisingly flat. So if you were to sit 3 abreast back here, it should be reasonably comfortable. On top of that, because the body of this car is wider than the PROTON X70, it also means that if you're carrying 3 passengers in the back, it should be a bit more comfortable. Additionally, our colleague Tai Chu-Yi on his channel demonstrated that you can have 2 child seats on either side and still sit an adult in the middle, provided that you are as trim as Tai Chu-Yi, which most of us are not. Now, in terms of the rear accoutrements, this is broadly on par with what you'd expect from vehicles within this segment. I'll go as far as to say as the Tiggo 7 Pro is more spacious than what you get from the Mazda CX-5, although that's not exactly a class leader in terms of cabin space, because that's not the point, but it is marginally smaller than what you get from a Honda CR-V. Also, the back end of this car is not as flexible as the CR-V in terms of being able to tilt the seats and do all that magic nonsense, so it's alright. But again, this is a 120,000 ringgit vehicle, so it's not bad. And you know what? I can say pretty much the same thing about how this car drives. The Tiggo 7 Pro is very inoffensive behind the wheel. So for starters, that engine and gearbox combination is a relatively smooth combination. So it gets up and goes as you expect it to, it doesn't really do anything too surprising. This is all broadly what you'd want out of a C-segment SUV. And although this is technically more powerful than the X70, it never really feels it, largely due to the fact that this car doesn't really appreciate being hurried. That's not really what it's about. The suspension setup also lends to the slightly more relaxed nature, which means that you drive this car gently. And that's sort of what the car likes most. And driven as such, you can really appreciate the smoothness in the power delivery. In fact, it might even be a little bit too smooth, because it doesn't quite jump off the line the way you might expect a turbocharged powertrain to. However, I think given that the majority of C-segment SUV buyers are looking for a family car that they can cart around kids in and maybe take in a few adventures from time to time, I think this is all perfectly alright. Now, in terms of driving dynamics, it's also sort of okay. This is not a car that's designed to be sporty or engaging. Instead, it's just meant to be comfortable. It'll just waft you from point to point. And in that sense, the Tiggo 7 does very well. This very soft suspension means that the secondary ride in this car is pretty good. The primary ride is also pretty good, as it irons out the worst lumps and bumps that life can throw at you. However, it does come somewhat in compromise in terms of body roll, because there is a decent amount of it. I think the PROTON X70 is a slightly tidier car to drive, let alone vehicles like the Honda CR-V and the Mazda CX-5. But again, most buyers in this segment aren't really looking for a C-segment SUV to light their heart on fire. That's not the point. Instead, the point of this is again as a family car, and I think that it does that really well. I wouldn't mind if I had children and a spouse driving them around in this, taking over long distance drives, balik kampung, or going on holiday, for example. I think that the Tiggo 7 Pro would be perfectly adequate at doing that. On top of that, when you hit motorway speeds, although yes, as I mentioned earlier, you do get some body roll, so don't try to carry too much speed through the corners, at least in terms of NVH, the Tiggo 7 Pro is also very impressive. You get laminated glass or acoustic glass all the way around the cabin in order to reduce the amount of noise ingress into this inner sanctum, as it were. And it does do a very good job at minimizing the amount of wind noise that might be kicked up by the A-pillars or, in fact, indeed, the wing mirrors. The only trouble comes in terms of road roar, and I think that this is largely down to the choice of tires. Now, these Atlas A51s, we know we've seen them before. In fact, I think they might be the ones fitted to the BYD Atto 3. And even in that car, we complained about the fact that there is quite a bit of road roar, largely down to that higher, stronger compound. Now, that does mean that they take a little bit longer to wear out, but it does also mean that you get some noise into the cabin. On top of that, the performance, which I alluded to earlier, is not quite what you'd expect or quite what you'd want from a car like this. I would prefer something with better wet weather performance, and in fact even dry weather performance, because it is worth noting that this car likes to break traction. If you get the torque up very quickly, if you stomp your foot on the pedal, this car will wheel spin. And on top of that, I have noticed that in wet weather conditions, if you try to chuck the car about, you will find that the limits of these tires are reached quite easily. And so I would recommend upgrading to something a bit better, especially with wet weather performance. But overall, for 90% of buyers, this setup is adequate enough. And I have a feeling that those tires have something to do with this car's fuel economy as well, because it is impressively low. Again, despite having more power and torque than the PROTON X90, the fuel consumption in this car has also been quite impressively low. Now, what we've seen through our testing has been broadly about 8.2 to 8.7 liters per 100 kilometers, and that's, again, real-world numbers. If you were to compare this to the PROTON X70, now that car would do between the low to high 9s, if not, in fact, the low 10s if you drive it a bit more intently. And so it is quite clear that this is a slightly more efficient package, despite, again, having the larger engine displacement, as well as a little bit more in terms of outputs. But I think that the wonderful thing about the Tiggo 7 Pro is the amount of value that's being offered, especially when you think about terms like safety. Now, the Tiggo 7 Pro comes chock full of active safety features like full level 2 semi-autonomy, replete with things like adaptive cruise control with traffic jam assist, lane keep assist, blind spot monitoring, and lane centering, among many other things, of course. And you also would have heard me mention the door opening warning back in the rear seats, which also apply to the front doors, I should add. And I think that this is broadly something that people want to look for if they're looking for a family car, because naturally, safety is a priority when it comes to shuttling your family about. And so the Tiggo 7 Pro puts forward a strong value proposition, just like the Tiggo 8 Pro did versus the X90 and Mazda CX-8 and so on, as did the Omoda 5 compared to vehicles like the Mazda CX-3, CX-30, PROTON X50, etc. I think that Chery's offensive is largely in order to capture as much market share as possible by providing the very best they can within sort of the reasonable business case. The fact that this Tiggo 7 Pro is currently available at an introductory price under 120,000 ringgit means that it is going head-to-head with Proton's best-selling X70, while comfortably undercutting other foreign competitors. But even at its full retail price of 123,800 ringgit, this is still a very good proposition, particularly given the fact this car comes with a 7-year warranty and an optional 10-year, 1 million kilometer warranty for the powertrain, which is a cost option, but you can bundle that into the loan at point of purchase. So you put all that together, and again, this does provide a very good value proposition. Now, would I recommend the Tiggo 7 Pro? Well, given the fact that Chery's been through some issues lately, and given how quickly they've been able to resolve it and meaningfully resolve it in a way that does kind of keep up customer confidence, I think that yes, this is a car that I could recommend. For this price, it puts up particularly good value, even against foreign competitors like the Toyota Corolla Cross, which is interestingly also available in a hybrid should you want to be driving more around town rather than out on the open road. And it is worth noting that if you are talking about open road driving and you're not severely constrained by budget, the Mazda CX-5 does do a slightly better job, particularly in the 2.5 litre or in fact the 2.2 litre turbo diesel. But if you're comparing the Tiggo 7 Pro with the PROTON X70 specifically, if you're looking at that very specific budget window, then I think the Tiggo 7 Pro does really, really well. Simply because it offers a little bit more than what the X70 does. It offers things like memory functionality for the seats. It offers wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. And it offers a slightly higher warranty in terms of the duration rather than the mileage. And so this does make it rather convincing. I think that if you're looking within this segment, it is worthwhile to test drive both cars back to back to figure out which one works better for you, because I do feel that the PROTON X70 is a slightly more sophisticated vehicle to drive, specifically in terms of driving dynamics and feedback to the driver, whereas this feels very much like a Chinese car. So it's a little bit soft, a little bit wallowy, a little bit dull. But again, for the majority of buyers, they're not really going to care. It drives well enough, it's comfortable, it's practical. I mean, what else do you really want? However, if you're looking for a C-segment SUV that does a little bit better in town, in urban usages and so on, then you may be swayed by vehicles like the Honda CR-V Hybrid as well as the Toyota Corolla Cross Hybrid, because both of those cars, again, offer much better fuel economy in urban settings. But I think that out on the open road, it's pretty much an even toss-up between all of these cars, because both the Corolla Cross and the CR-V Hybrid use smaller engines, which may not necessarily be as powerful when you need a little bit more grunt, especially out on the motorway. I do think the Tiggo 7 Pro is an excellent car. It is certainly something that I would recommend for people looking within this segment. I think Chery has once again demonstrated that it is willing to put margins aside and focus predominantly on ensuring that customers get the very best value for money, and I think that is exactly what this car is all about. In any case, that has been our review of the Chery Tiggo 7 Pro. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to be notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.